Firestarter by Stephen King was published in 1980. I first read it probably around 1990 or 1995, and I probably reread it maybe 2 or 3 times since then. And I just revisited it last week. It's interesting how my perspective has changed, having read it as a child and then read it as an adult. I think it's important to remember this novel was written in the late 1970s. Even though it was published in 1980, it would have been written before then. So it has all the earmarks you would expect from a novel written in the 1970s. There's a lot of casual sexism, casual racism, casual transphobia, and all that. I believe that the sexism bothered me even as a little kid, but I think my mind glossed over it like, oh, I guess, adults do weird things. I don't know. And it's a little harder to take when you're reading it now through a current lens, I would say. In addition to that, of course, it's dated in all kinds of ways. Everyone's smoking cigarettes. People can pay for hotel rooms with coins. It's interesting to me that the government agents from the shop, they are very much cliches, and yet they're still ominous and creepy. They're even written as inept, kind of bungling agents, and yet at the same time, they're horrific in how ordinary they are. Stephen King has always been a master at turning ordinary events and people into kind of monsters. And it's interesting how these shop agents, they're kind of motivated by just earning a promotion, making their resume better, normal things. And after they do some kind of awful thing, they go home to their wife and kids, and it's totally fine for them. And that's part of what makes them so horrific. One more thing that I think modern audiences might have a little trouble with is the premise is sort of predicated on people not believing that a little girl or an ordinary man can have supernatural powers. Whereas today's audiences, I think we grew up on Marvel and DC Comics and movies and so forth, and everyone is used to the idea of superpowers. We've seen the Umbrella Academy and the TV show Heroes, and the idea of powers, even though it's not reality, it's been presented in fiction so often and in so many ways. I think it's no longer this mind-blowing, oh my god, how is that even possible type of thing. I think a modern reader reads The Shop and they come across as even more bungling than they should, because the whole thing is like, they just can't believe that a little 8-year-old girl can light fires with her mind and so forth. Before I get into spoilers, I'll just say, this is still a brilliant novel. It's dated. I think it is actually still worth reading in many ways. I recommend it. Now I'm going to get into some spoilers here. So one thing Stephen King has always been a master of is ratcheting up the tension. I think one thing he does is early on he sets the stage with this novel where one of the evil scientists says, this little girl might be able to nuke the planet. Okay, so audience expectations have been set astronomically high. We now know that this little girl, she's not just going to be setting, a small fire in your fireplace. She might do something truly horrific, large scale, and the audience is now primed to expect that, and we're going to see where it's going. But of course, I think anyone who reads a lot of Stephen King knows that the author does a lot of self-insert into his novels. So his main characters tend to be English professors, possibly addicted to some sort of alcohol or substance, and often kind of inept fathers. This novel has all 3 of that going on. The story, I would say, really is about Andy McGee and not his daughter, Charlie. And for me, a huge part of the appeal of this book is that it's about a father learning to step up and a man overcoming an addiction. And that's really what the heart of the story. And for the most part, Andy is a character you can root for. He's admirable in a lot of ways. He doesn't actually start out as an addict. It's the government that addicts him to, I can't remember exactly what the drug was. I think it might have been Valium, something like that. They addict him to something that just turns him into a drooling shell of a person watching TV shows. The novel doesn't really dwell on that part of it too much. It dwells on him feeling trapped, helpless, unable to help his daughter. And it's really interesting the way he overcomes the addiction. Andy is a mental dominant, so he can force people to do anything he wants. He can plant ideas into their heads and push them into obeying his commands. The way he overcomes addiction is by pushing himself in a dream. So he falls asleep. He knows that he needs to get off these drugs. He sees no way out of it. And he ends up carrying like a big bin full of the drugs to a garbage unit. And he doesn't want to throw them in. He's like, no, I need these drugs. They're the only thing that makes life bearable right now. And one of the people he helped in the past, he helped businessmen find more confidence and women lose weight. And a woman who he helped go from like 300 pounds to 120 pounds or whatever, she comes up to him looking cute. And she's like, you helped me overcome my addiction. and I'm going to help you now. And she helps him push these pills down the garbage chute. And it's kind of a touching scene. And he wakes up thinking, I need the pill. Oh, wait, I actually don't really need the pill. And, on the one level, it's like, wow, magical overcoming addiction. That would be wonderful. But on the other hand, overcoming addiction really is sort of a mental trick for anyone who has done it and tried it. And if it works, it is all in your head. Gambling addictions and so forth. There's no substance involved. People overcome that. It's just a very well done, like, okay, here's how it is a mental trick. And from there, Andy has to pretend to still be addicted. So he has to just, kind of imitate a really awful human being where he doesn't care about his daughter. He just cares about his next meal, his next TV show, being sent to Hawaii. And he has to pretend to be this awful person. And whenever he's fooled or lulled the government agents into thinking that he's that person, and he gets one of them alone, then he'll switch on and be like, okay, here's what you're going to do, and start like giving him mental domination orders. And I thought that was just so clever and so fun. And that's how Andy is able to arrange an escape plan for himself and Charlie. The other really interesting part of this is that Charlie has to be untrained from the fire training her parents gave her. So she was trained as an infant to not light dangerous fires. They yelled at her every time. And, as a father disciplining a child, he had to do that. Andy had to do that. And so the government agents are working against that deep training where they have to untrain her and make her think it's okay to light the fires. There's a theme where Rainbird is replacing her father in the government shop. Rainbird being an awful hitman, basically. He's giving her the comfort and the okay that her father should have been giving her, but of course her father is a drugged out husk somewhere else in the facility, or so they think. But another aspect to that theme is that Charlie is growing up and overcoming the training that her parents gave her and starting to question things. And so that's wonderfully done as well. There are definitely some quirky, silly things related to the time this novel was published in. One thing was the government computer is how Rainbird figures out that Andy has overcome the drug addiction and is now actively working against them. And it's kind of funny because this computer is calculating probabilities. And I'm like, well, you could just use your common sense. Maybe if you have a, quote, mental dominant in your facility who you think is drugged up, and suddenly people are committing suicide in strange ways and acting really strange, there might be a reason. And anyone who grew up watching Marvel movies would have immediately suspected Andy. But I guess Rainbird needed a government computer to tell him that this was the case. Overall, there's a really poignant climax to this novel, and the wrap-up is pretty interesting as well. I'm just going to say it's still one of my favorites by Stephen King. And I plan to watch the movie remake at some point, and I'll probably do a review of that as well.